In 1997, a boy vanished from his family's farmhouse without a trace. No broken windows, no footprints. Just one strange thing left behind the furnace in the basement began to breathe. Now, nearly 30 years later, his sister has come home, and behind that same furnace wall, something is waiting, something that remembers, and it just knocked back before we begin. Make sure to subscribe, because some stories weren't meant to stay buried. Emily Kessler hadn't heard her mother's voice in almost 6 years, and yet Thelator in her hand made it impossible not to think of her. The envelope was yellowed and unsealed, as if it had been opened once and closed again by guilt. There was no return address, just a name Kessler scrawled in handwriting that made her stomach turn. It arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a bank statement and a real estate flyer. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded. Once no date, no greeting. He's still there behind the furnace. Emily sat down at the kitchen table, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The apartment around her was still, refrigerator humming, a faint city siren in the distance. The pale glow of morning pressing through the blinds. Her coffee had gone cold. The spoon trembled slightly in its saucer. She read the words again. Her first instinct was to tear it up. Her second was to call her sister. Her third, and the one that won, was to stand up and cross to the hallway. Close it, she reached into a dusty box labeled 1997 photos. Clippings, police flyers with her brother's face on them. Jacob Kessler, age 8, last seen June 2 in 1997. The farmhouse had been searched, every inch of it, so they were told. Thepolis said there was no sign of a struggle, no signs of a break-in. Jacob had simply vanished. The only part of the house they couldn't access was the basement utility room, the old boiler and furnace area sealed shut with a rusted latch. The door had been warped shut by a winter flood. They said nothing significant was behind it, but Emily remembered something different. She remembered the sound that used to come from behind that door, not the clank-o-fold pipes, but something softer, like whispering, like scratching. She never spoke of it, not to her mother, not to the detectives, and not to her therapist, until now. She had let herself believe it was all a child's imagination, but now he's still there behind the furnace. She pulled her phone from her pocket. The contact was still there, though she hadn't used it in years. Mom, asterisk. The line rang once, twice, then a click of voice answered, thinner than she remembered. Emily froze. The sound off her mother's voice unlocked something she didn't expect. Not anger, not sorrow, but fear. You got one too, didn't you? Emily asked quietly. Her mother wassailing for a beat. Then yes, this morning did. You call anyone? No? Why not? Her mother's voice faltered. Because I think it's time. Emily stared down at the letter, her fingers curled around it. I'm coming home, she said. The drive north felt like moving backward through time. Emily passed familiar exits on the highway. The lake with the leaning docks, billboard for the old dairy farm that had closed when she was a teenager. Each mile peeled away a layer of her present life until she was no longer 39, with a project deadline and a rent-controlled apartment in the city. She was 11 again, in the back seat of her father's Buick, Jacob beside her, humming to himself, inventing a song with no words they used to play a game in the car, spotting certain trees they named, counting broken fence posts like stars that stopped the summer. He went missing after that. There was no music, not counting. Just silence. The farmhouse appeared over the rise like something out of a memory she had tried to hard to forget. The gravel driveway was choked with frost, the mailbox hung by one rusted screw. The front windows, once filled with light and sun-bleached curtains, were now empty black rectangular saints. The weathered gray wood. Emily pulled up slowly, tires crunching over brittle ice. She turned off the engine and sat in the quiet. No birds, no wind. Had forgotten how still the place could be. The front door opened before she could knock. Her mother stood framed in the doorway, smaller than Emily remembered, wrapped in a pale cardigan. Her once dark hair was streaked with silver. There were deeper lines around her mouth and a shadow behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. Neither of them moved. Finally, her mother stepped back. Come in. Kept the heat running, just in case Emily crossed the threshold and into the past. The house hadn't changed much. The same braided rug in the entry. The same grandfather clock that hadn't worked since 2003. A faint scent off cedar, old coffee, and something faintly metallic lingered in the air, not unpleasant, just strange, on the hallway wall. Jacob's school photo still hung in its plastic frame, the same toothless smile, the same too big flannel shirt. Emily paused in front of it. He would have turned 34. This year, her mother said quietly. Emily nodded. Unable to speak in the kitchen, her mother poured tea. As if no time had passed, they sat in silence for a while, both cupping their mugs. Like asterisk something sacred, Eileen finally reached into her coat and slid the letter on table. Her mother didn't look surprised. I burned mine. She said softly, but I memorized it first. Do you think it's real? Her mother didn't answer. She stared at the tea. As if reading answers in the steam. You know what the police said, she finally murmured. That the furnace room was inaccessible, that he likely wandered off. Emily's hand clenched. But he didn't just wander off, no. Her mother agreed, her voice barely a whisper. He was afraid of the basement, you remember. Emily did used to cry if the door was opened wide. Said something lived behind the furnace, a whispering shadow. Everyone thought he was just being imaginative, but Emily had heard it too once, and now Simeon or something wanted them to look again later that night after her mother had gone to bed. Emily stood at the top of the basement stairs, the door cricketous. She opened it. Cold air spilled up from the darkness. She clicked on the light switch. A dim bulb flickered to life, casting shadows along the concrete steps, each creak beneath. Her foot sounded too loud. The basement looked at untouched boxes, paint cans, a row of dusty Christmas decorations, and in the back corner the furnace room door still closed, still, chain still warped, shut like it had been swallowed by the house itself. Emily approached it slowly. There on the wooden surface, just above the handle, was something new, a single smudge, like a child's fingerprint, fresh. The next morning brought snow, not much, just a dusting that frosted the tops of the fence posts and coated the porch railing. Emily stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching it fall in slow spirals. Her Martha was still upstairs, likely asleep or avoiding her at 9:13 a.m. Simeon knocked on the front door. Emily blinked. The sound startled her. The house was so far off the road, visitors were rare, especially in winter. She opened the door cautiously. An older man stood there in a tan parka, wool gloves, and a faded twins cap. His breath curled in the cold air. His eyes were kind but sharp. Emily Kassler. He asked. Yes, he smiled faintly. Didn't think you'd remember me. I'm Walt Henderson. I live up on Ridge Lane. Your dad and I played high school baseball together. I helped board up the place. Asterisk. After everything, she stared for a moment. The name clicked. Walter, the neighbor who'sed to give them extra tomatoes. In the summer, the man who used to plow their drive before the county snow crews came. I remember you, she said. You used to call Jacob spaghetti legs. Walt chuckled. He hated that. Emily managed to smile. I saw your car in the driveway last night, he said. Figured you came back for a reason. She hesitates. Simeon sent a letter. Walt's expression changed just slightly, like a curtain shifting. In a closed room, what kind of letter? Emily opened the door wider and gestured toward the kitchen. You want coffee? They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Jacob had once built towers out of sugar cubes. Emily slid the letter across Walt. Didn't touch it. He read it, then leaned back, folding his arms. I'll be honest with you, Al. You said you and your brother were good kids, but I always thought there was something wrong with that basement. Emily stiffened. What do you mean? You ever hear a house? Breathe, Emily, she frowned. Breathy. I know it sounds strange, he said, but I used to help your dad with a furnace every fall right before the freeze. There was something about that room. It was too warm, always, even with heat off, and when you stood by the back wall it felt hollow. Emily's finger gripped her coffee mug. Hollow. Walt nodded, like there was space behind it. It told your dad once. He just smiled, said the house had secrets. Her voice came out low. And then Jacob went missing. Walt looked at her steadily. I never believed ran off. Kids don't run without shoes. Not in this part of Minnesota. Emily swallowed hard. The furnace room is still sealed. You should have someone look off it. While she nodded slowly, Walt reached into his coat and pulled out a folded newspaper, clipping yellowed brittle. He laid it on the table. It was a short article, dated June 5th, 1997. Title, Local Boy Still Missing, but someone had circled something in red ink. A name, Michael Holbrook, age 56, maintenance contractor. Previously employed by the Kessler family, reported missing 2 days after Jacob. Emily's heart dropped. I don't remember this, she whispered. Most people don't. Walt said, but 2 people went missing that week, not one later. As Walt left, Emily stood at the door watching his figure disappear down the snowy path. She returned to the kitchen and picked up the article again, reading the name over and over. Michael Halbrook. The name meant nothing to her, bet maybe it meant something to the house. She glanced toward the basement. She didn't know what she'd find behind the furnace, but she no longer believed she'd find only memories. The snow kept falling through the afternoon, softening the roof lines, blanketing the past in. Photo you wouldn't look twice at, but on the back in faded blue ink, her mother had written Fall Maintenance Day, me, Jack, and MHM. Emily stared at the initials. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Her mother was awake, seated on the edge of her bed, with a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes flicked to the photo in Emily's hand, then back to her face. Why didn't you tell me about him? Emily asked. Her mother said nothing. Michael Holbrook. He worked here. He went missing the same week. Jacob did. That's not a coincidence. Her mother looked older in the light. Thinner, almost translucent, like someone who'd been worn down from the inside. We never knew for sure he was missing. She said finally, he was a quiet man. Came twice a year to Resurface. The furnace and water heater never stayed long, then 1 year. Hadn't come back. Emily sat beside her. You wrote his initials on this photo. You shouldn't have. Why? Her mother looked out the window. Because I didn't want to remember what he said the last time I saw him. Emily waited. It was 3 days. Bore. Jacob disappeared. She said he came early. Said something was off in the furnace room. Not mechanical, atmospheric. Said it felt like the house was breathing. Emily's chest tightened. Walt said the same thing. Her mother nodded slowly. Your father laughed it off. Thought Michael was eccentric, but Michael wasn't the type to scare easy. That night he came back unannounced. Sighed he wanted to take another look. Jack told him no. Said we'd wait until fall. Anthony. Jacob. Her mother closed her eyes, and then everything changed that night. Emily couldn't sleep. She wandered the halls, touching picture frames, opening drawers, searching for anything else that might connect the threads in her father's old desk. She found a thick manila folder labeled Property Kessler Farm. Most of it was utility bills. Butone paper slipped free from the back, a hand-drawn diagram. The basement dated 1973. She looked closer on the diagram. A narrow rectangle had been labeled storage. Tunnels sealed in red ink. It extended behind the furnace room. While Emily's stomach turned, he's still there behind the furnace in Themmerning. She returned to the cellar. This time, she brought gloves, a flashlight, and a hammer. She wasn't going to wait any longer. The door was warped and chained, but the hinges gave. Slowly, under pressure, she struck carefully, quietly, like someone afraid to wake something. After 30 minutes of effort, the door cracked open with a reluctant groan. A wave of stale, warm air brushed out her face. The furnace loomed ahead, cold, now dormant pipes curled like iron veins across the ceiling. She stepped inside. The flashlight flickered, then steady. The walls were lined with stone and brick, and in the far corner behind Doinet was what looked like a patched-over segment of wall square, and uneven. She moved closer. Her breath caught in her throat. There, barely visible in the dusty stone, were markings scratched, lines, faint impressions, as if someone had once striven to claw their way out. Emily's hand trembled as she lifted the light higher. There were initials in the dust. J.K. Emily didn't sleep that night. She sat in Thalavine room, lights off, listening to the furnace hum through the floorboards, like it always had, a low, rhythmic breath that never seemed to stop, even when the unit itself wasn't running. She held the photograph of the furnace room diagram in one hand and a cup of tea in the other, though it had long gone cold. Storage tunnel sealed. Why would there be a tunnel in a farmhouse basement, and why seal it? The markings behind the furnace hadn't been imaginative. These were real, deep grooves scratched into old mortars and stone, the kind of marks a person might make if they were trying to get out the next morning. Emily. A call to public library in town was still running, though smaller now, shisked for the archives, and was connected to a local historian, a soft-spoken woman named Helen Orville, who agreed to meet her that afternoon. I've worked with the old property ledgers, Helen said over thephone. The Kessler place, it goes back to the late 1800s. Most folks think it Wasselway's a farmhouse, but that land had a story long before your family. Aravet's library smelled of paper and floor wax, just as Emily remembered Helen was waiting in the back corner, a stack of yellowed folders beside her. Miss Kessler said kindly. I pulled what I could find from before 1950, the rest well. It gets murky. She opened one of the folders. The land was originally part of a larger property owned by a man named Elias Granger. He ran a sort of home for troubled youth, unofficial backwoods. Not state-regulated, it shut down after a fire in 1926. Records say a section of the building collapsed. No mention of casualties, but that was common back. Emily leaned closer. What kind of collapse underground there? Was a rutula, and something beyond it, a bricked-over passage the documents don't. So how'd it led to only that it was unsafe when the land was sold in the 40s? Stiaz had been torn down, a new structure. Your family's was built over foundation. Emily stared at her. They built the farmhouse over the ruins. Helen nodded. People did that sort of thing all the time, especially if they wanted to forget back at the house. Emily laid the old blueprint next to her father's diagram. The lines matched. The storage etnal was in the same location as the old root cellar from the Granger records, and it was sealed not with wood but with concrete and brick. She went back down to the furnace room and crouched in the corner. Again, this time she pressed her palm flat to the wall. It was warmer than the rest of the basement, and behind it Somathan gave slightly like an echo behind stone. She stood abruptly, the flashlight shaking in her hand from the stairs above. She thought she heard movement, a soft step, then silence. She whispered, but when she went up, the hallway was empty. Her mother was still asleep. The front door was locked, still on the porch. She found something resting on the wood rail, a button-worn brass like one from a kotu, old to wear, too precious to throw away. She picked it up slowly, and as she shattered it in her hand, she saw scratched faintly into the metal on the underside. Initials MH. Emily hadn't been up to the attic in over 20 years. The narrow pull-down ladder groaned under her weight. As she climbed, flashlight tucked under one arm, dust swirled in the cold air above her, stirred by her arrival like forgotten memories waking from sleep. The attic had always frightened her as a child, not because it was dark or cramped, but because it felt what Shedge had once told Jacob. It was where the house kept its secrets. Now she knew she'd been more right than she realized. Moved past old boxes of holiday decorations and childhood toys, her breath visible in the chill. Something drew her to the far corner, where an antique trunk sat wedged beneath a sloped beam. It wasn't labeled, and Thelic had long since rusted through inside, under layers of yellowed linen sand. Cracked books. She found a leather-bound journal. It was worn at the corners, the spine nearly split. No Nemea in the front. She opened it. March 12, 1996. Kessler property. Initial inspection froze. The handwriting was careful, methodical. Male basement. Utility room wall shows signs of expansion, not from moisture. From something else. Internal pressure, heat readings, inconsistent with room temperature. Back wall sounds. Haloto the tap, but only some days when it's quiet. She flipped further. Head May 5th, 1997. The breathing wall again. This time I heard something. Not a voice, not an animal, a rhythm like someone waiting, then toward the back. May 30th, 1997. The boy asked me if the wall was alive. Her breath caught. He said it whispered to him at night. Said it remembered things. It told him it was just the furnace. I shouldn't have lied. The final entry, June 1, scene 1997. Going back tonight after hours. Need to know if I don't return. Let the wall sleep. Let it forget there was no signature. But she didn't need one. It was his Michael Holbrook. Emily sat in the attic for a long time, the journal in her lap. She could hear the soft ticking of the house beneath her like something old and patient. She descended the ladder and found her mother in the kitchen, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Where was he? Staying? Emily asked without preamble. When he worked here? Her mother looked startled. Michael. Yes. Her mother hesitated. We had a guest room back then in the west hallway. Emily turned without a word and headed down the narrow corridor. She hadn't walked in decades. The west hallway hallways felt colder than the rest of the house, though her father said it was just poor insulation. She opened the door to the guest room. The mattress was gone, the curtains moth-eaten, but the space felt evious, as though time still lived here untouched. There was a bookshelf against the wall, mostly empty except for one object, a small toy, a carved wooden figurine. A boy holding a lantern, Jacob's. She remembered it. He'd lost it the week before he disappeared. Said it had been taken. Emily picked it up, slowly turned and It over there was something scratched into the base still here that night. She dreamed of the furnace of warm stone and shallow. Breath of scratching not frantic but deliberate, and in her dream Jacob's voice whispered it doesn't want to be forgotten. The next morning the snow had stopped the sky above Farmhouse. It was pale, almost colorless, the kind of cold that settled into the ground and didn't leave for weeks. Emily stood in the driveway with a set of keys in her pocket and a folded note. In her hand, Walt Henderson arrived just after 10 o'clock. He pulled up in his old pickup, stepped out with a crowbar and a canvas bag of tools, and gave her a firm nod. "You sure about this?" he asked, tightening his gloves. "No," she said, "but I need to know." Walt didn't press further. He followed her through the house and down the basement stairs in silence, the heavy steps creaking beneath his weight. Emily unlocked the furnace room door and stepped aside. The air inside was even warmer than before, not like a furnace. Room more like a greenhouse left in direct sun. It felt wrong. Walt moved slowly, assessing the wall behind the unit. "This is newer Thantrest," he said, tapping the bricks with the butt of his flashlight. Different mortar poured over something, and here he pointed to the edge. These bricks weren't laid by a professional. Someone patched this up fast. Emily nodded. "There's a tunnel behind it, an old one from before the house was built." Walt raised an eyebrow, but didn't question her. He crouched to unpack his tools. Then the light shifted. Emily stepped back instinctively as the shadows on the wall seemed to ripple, not from her movement, not from the flashlight, but from within. Wall itself. Walt paused. "Did you see that I did?" The air grew thick, not warm, no, but dense, like the oxygen had been drained. Then a sound, software, faint like breath. Emily leaned in, just slightly, heart pounding, and then knock once. From inside the wall, she stumbled back. A cry caught in her throat. Walt froze, crowbar half. "Raise, that wasn't us." They stared at the wall in stunned silence. Still here, the words from the figurine echoed in her mind. "He's still there." Walt recovered first. "That's not the furnace, and it's not the pipes." Emily's voice shook. "Do we open it?" Walt glanced at the tools, then back at the wall. "If we do, we don't do it alone." They went upstairs, locking the basement door behind them. Mother sat in the parlor knitting something that wasn't growing. Her hands moved out of habit. Now, not purposed. Emily sat across from her. "Did you hear it?" Her mother looked up, and for a moment, the distance in her eyes vanished. "I've heard it every night since the letter came," she whispered. Emily's breath caught. "Why didn't you say anything?" Her mother folded the half-finished scarf in her lap. "Because part of me thought it was Jacob." Emily didn't speak. "He used to talk about the wall," her mother said. "He said it. Listen to him, said it held memories. I thought he was dreaming, but maybe it was remembering him." To a long silence. Then her mother reached out and took Emily's hand. "If you're going to open it," she said, "do it before the next full moon. That's when it's strongest." Emily's eyes widened. "What is?" Her mother looked at her. "Whatever it is that remembers that night." Emily sat by the basement door, with a journalpen in her lap. The pages seemed to breathe with her, let the wall sleep. Halbrook had written, but the wall wasn't sleeping anymore. It was waiting. Emily didn't dream that night. Not in the usual way. She saw the furnace room. Again dark, pulsing with warmth, but it wasn't empty. A boy stood there, barefoot and pale, with dust on his cheeks and soot on his fingers. He looked up at her slowly, and though his lips didn't move, she heard the words as clearly as a whisper behind her ear. "You stopped looking." Emily jolted awake, the sound of the words still hanging in the quiet. The bedside lamp was off. She reached for it, flick it, switched nothing. The power was out. She stumbled into the hallway. The old clock wasn't ticking. The thermostat screen was blank. Downstairs, her mother stood near the window, wrapped in a robe. Emily's voice was "Whore, power's down." Her mother nodded. "It started with the lights flickering, then the heater went. Now everything's quiet." Emily paused. "Did Yahoo or anything else?" Her mother's hand tightened around her robe. Footsteps on the stairs. Both looked at the basement door. It was still locked, still, but the silence in the house had changed. Not peace, something closer to waiting. Later that morning, Walt returned with a headlamp, a thermal scanner, and 2 heavy-duty lanterns. "I brought salt." "2," he said, only half joking, "just in case." Emily managed to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes together. They entered the basement again. The air was thick, heavier, thin, before like the walls were pressing and the flashlight beams swam in the dark picking. Out dust motes that floated unnaturally slow. Walt scanned the wall with the thermal gun. His brow furrowed. It's hotter than the rest of the room. Be a lot.
Oh.
Something's radiating behind it like a furnace. Emily asked. Number, this isn't mechanical heat. This feels residual, like the wall is remembering zooming. Warm. Emily shivered. They unpacked tools in silence. The first strike came slow. Crowbar wedged into the brick line. The mortar cracked. A sudden gust of warm air rushed from a hairline fracture. Strong enough to blow Emily's hair back. Walt dropped the tool. That's not normal. The flashlight flickered. They both froze. Then footstep light upstairs. Walt whispered, "Is your mom home?" Emily shook her head. She left. "Oh, get groceries." They waited. Breathless, another step slow, deliberate. Then a thing. Walt grabbed the crowbar again. "Keep going," he asked. Emily looked athwal at the fresh crack running through its center behind. She could almost hear breathing again, but slower. No, like something was aware of them, like it had woken up. She swallowed hard. "Yes," she said, "we open it." That night, Emily found her bedroom window. Open. Thou she didn't remember opening it. There on the windowsill sat the wooden figurine of the boy with the lantern. Its head had turned now. It faced inward toward her. The next morning they began breaking through the wall in earnest. Emily and Walt worked in shifts, slow, deliberate strikes that chipped away the thick, uneven mortars. Every crack released a strange, stale warmth, and with it came the smell of old dust, dry earth, and something else. Sweet like decaying wood soaked in syrup. Neither of them mentioned it by midday. Walt dislodged a brick near the base, and behind it for the first time they saw it. Darkness, not just a shadow, but a deep and natural void. Not the absence of light, but the presence of something older. Thanzalin's Emily leaned forward with her lantern. The beam revealed a short corridor, barely tall enough to crouch and carved from rough stone. No finished wells, no bricks, just raw earth. She reached inside. Her fingers brushed something. Cool. She pulled it out slowly. A small metal object, rusted, twisted, acky. Not modern, old, ornate, and hanging from it rotted away. 2 little more thorn threads was the faint remnant of what once might have been ribbon. Walt held up lantern and peered into the passage. There's something else, he said on Theffler. He reached in and gently withdrew a small wooden box no larger than a jewelry case. The lid was cracked inside, wrapped in waxed cloth. Were teeth, tiny worn children's. Emily turned away, her breath catching, not from shock, but from something deeper, recognition. Jacob had lost a tooth the week before he disappeared. She remembered because he cried when she told him the tooth fairy couldn't come if he hid it under his bed instead. Oh, fist pillow. They cleared more bricks. The tunnel beyond curved, gently vanishing into darkness. Emily wasn't sure how far it went, but something about the air told her it didn't go far, not in distance, but in depth. She stood staring into it when her hand brushed the inside of the wall and caught on something rough. She turned her lantern on it, a message carved into the inner stone. Surface nearly invisibleness, lit from the side. Don't open it unless you're ready to leave something behind. Beneath THATJH 197, Emily stared at the initials, not Jacob Kessler, JH Jacob Holbrook. She backed away slowly. Walt, she said, voice shaking. There were 2 Jacobs that night. Emily couldn't sit still. She read the journal again and again, the way Holbrook described the wall, as breathing, as aware, the way Jacob had described the tunnel to her the week before he disappeared. It hums at night, he had whispered. It wants stories. It wants to remember. She thought of the teeth, of the button, of the scratched initials written in a hand that didn't quite match Jacob's. There was a pattern, a memory loop. Whatever lived behind Thruel, whatever had been sealed and long ago. It didn't take people, it kept them like pages in a diary. And now the wall had opened just wide enough to want one more. Emily waited until nightfall, not because she wanted to, but because something in her told her it had to be dark, that the wall behind the furnationally remembered clearly. In the dark, Walt offered to stay, but she asked him to live. She needed to do this alone. She descended the basement stairs with a lantern in one hand and the journal tucked beneath her arm. The furnace groaned softly beside her, not running it, exhaling warm air like breath through unseen lungs. She crouched at the tunnel entrance. The carved message still lingered in her mind. Don't open I-10less. You're ready to leave something behind. The key from the box was tied around her wrist with a strip of linen. Other items, the teeth, the ribbon, the box sat untouched on the worked Emily crawled. In the tunnel was narrow, just wide enough to move through on hands and knees. The walls were packed. Earth and Danchian stone, and they smelled of old wood and heat like the inside of an attic. No one had entered in decades. That darkness deepened behind her. The farther she went, the warmer the air grew, not like furnace heat, but living warmth, like a body pressed close to her. She could hear her own breath, and beneath it, a hum, a low sound, toneless yet aware. Then she reached it. The tunnel opened into a small, hollow chamber, no taller than a child. Emily sat back on her heels, lantern raised. The walls were covered in names etched by hand, dozens of them, some careful script. Others rushed, almost frantic. Some were half-finished. E. Write Clara M. Jonas, T1938 MHJH 1997. Ish ran her fingers along the letters. Almost reverently then, her eyes fell on a single wooden shelf. Sagging with age laid upon it were objects. A small red mitten, a girl's broken glasses, a boy's marble, a doll's head, each one labeled with initials scratched into the shelf beneath it. Memory tokens, a room of what was left, and in the corner, tucked behind a faded music box, was something that didn't belong, a photograph, slightly curled at the edges. A girl standing in the field behind the Kessler house. No more than 11, her Emily Kessler. Sumiana had placed her photo here long ago. A sharp sound behind her made her freesieth hum grew louder, not from the walls, from inside her, a voice not spoken, Boo thought. Slipped into her mind like fog under a door. Will you trade? She shook her head, backing against the wall. Trade what? She whispered, but she already knew this place kept what it remembered. One memory for another, one name for one. Los this still here? The voice whispered, you may bring him back, but something must take his place. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Jacob alive. Somehow no note to live, but held preserved in the house's memory like a pressed flower. Will you trade? The voice asked again. And then, just for a moment, she heard Jacob's voice in her mind. Please. I don't want to be forgotten. Emily clutched the theftograph of herself at once, a memory, in return her story. Herself would vanish so he could return. Was that the price she crawled backward, heart-pounding, breath shaking. The tunnel seemed longer now, the hum louder through warmth, suffocating, but she emerged into the furnace room. Again, sweat on her brow, hands trembling. The wall was unchanged, the chamber behind it sealed now. Somehow, as if it had shown her only what it wanted her to see, and now it waited. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, staring through the frosted window at the empty road beyond the house. Was quiet again, but not peacefully so. It was the silence of something that had made a request and was now waiting for an answer. Her fingers still trembled from the crawl through the tunnel. She had washed them twice, but she could still feel the dust beneath. Her nails still smelled the stale warmth in her hair. Will you trade? She couldn't stop hearing the question. I thought had been more than a whisper. It had felt like a presence pressing into her thoughts, folding around. Her name behind her. Her mother entered the kitchen, wrapped in her winter shawl. I need you to tell me the truth, Emily said without turning all of it. Her mother paused, then pulled out a chair and said, the night Jacob disappeared. Emily said softly, it wasn't just a night Hugh wandered off, was it? Her mother was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator clicked. Off a distant wind pressed against the siding of the house, rattling it gently. Finally, her mother spoke. No. She began slowly, as if the words had been kept in a room that hadn't been opened in decades. Your father. She said he found the tunnel first, before Jacob ever mentioned it. Emily turned, never said anything he didn't want to. Said it was probably an old root cellar, but something bothered him. Something about the heat coming from that wall, and sometimes the noise. Her mother rubbed her hands together. Then Jacob started hearing things, saying the wall talked to him, that it told him stories, that it remembered things people forgot. Emily felt cold again, deep in her chest. He said there were names inside. Her mother contended that it wanted to show him something. We thought it was imagination. Your father humored him, even let him sleep down there. Once Emily's head snapped up. What? Just once? Jacob begged him, said the wall would stop whispering if it knew he listened. Your father thought it was just a phase. A long pause at that night. Jacob never came back up. Her mother looked at her now, eyes shining. We searched, we called the police, you remember, but no one could find the tunnel. It was sealed again. But you knew he knew something had taken him or kept him. And then one day a man showed up. Michael Holbrook. He said he'd been to the house years before. Said he'd heard about Jacob and wanted to help. He said house kept memories. and that it asked for them in return. Her voice broke, said we could have Jacob back, but someone else would have to take his plus. Emily stared. You didn't know her mother. Said firmly we didn't agree. We begged it to release him, but the house went silent. The wall sealed again. Michelle, he disappeared, and you never told me. Her mother's voice cracked. You were just a girl. We wanted to protect what little of our family we had. La Family rose slowly from her chair. It's asking again. She said last night I'd afford again. Her mother's face turned pale. You can't, she whispered it. Doesn't give it replaces. Emily walked to the doorway and looked toward the basement stairs. Think it remembers me now, she said quietly. And I think it's asking me to choose this time. That night, she sat alone in her childhood bedroom with a journal in her lap and Jacob's figurine beside her on the nightstand. It no longer faced the window. Now it pointed directly at the door. The furnace hummed faintly through the floor. The house was listening. Emily couldn't sleep the hum off. The furnace vibrated through her mattress, a low pulse that matched her heartbeat. The figurine on her nightstand hadn't moved again, but she no longer believed it needed to. The house knew her no. It had waited, it had watched, and now it had asked. She rose before dawn and lit a candle. The power still hadn't come back, though no other houses in town had reported outages. Just hers. She pulled out an old notebook and sat at the desk by the window, the flame flickering beside her, and she began to write. Dear Jacob, I don't know if you'll ever read this or if the house will let it find you, but I need to try. You've been gone a long time, long enough that people stopped asking, long enough that some forgot you were ever here. But I didn't. I never stopped listening for your footsteps on the stairs. I used to blame myself for not staying with you, for not telling Mom and Dad that something about the basement wasn't right, but I was just a kid and sour. You were curious, brave, always trying to understand things no one else could. Maybe that's why it noticed Yomabe. That's why it chose you. But here's the truth. You are not forgotten. I remember the way you laughed when your glasses slipped down your nose. I remember how you collected those weird coins from cereal boxes. I remember. You used to say the furnace sounded like a sleeping dragon. I remember you, Jacob. And if memory is what the house wants, if it feeds on remembering, then it already has everything it needs. So I won't try to myself. I won't give you up, and I won't let the house take another name. It's toffle, its hollow rooms, but I will give it this. I give it every memory I have. Oh, few everyone. She folded the letter and pressed her thumb to the seal, then carrying only her lantern and the paper, she descended into the basement. Thefernay's room felt warmer than ever. The tunnel behind the brick still gaped open like a mouth waiting for its next breathum. We knelt beside it. She whispered, "This is yours now," and slid the letter into the opening. The air changed. The hum stopped for the first time in weeks. The silence wasn't heavy. It was listening. Then a sound from deep within the tunnel, a soft shuffle, a sigh, and then a voice, faint, dry, but real. Emily. She gasped. The voice was older, tired, but it was his Emily. I remember she leaned forward, hands trembling. Jacob, the silence returned. But this time it was not emptiness. It was peace. She turned back toward the room. On the furnace floor now sat something that hadn't been there before, a coin, plastic red from a cereal box. Jacob's Emily didn't speak of the voice to her mother, not yet. She kept the coin in her pocket, a piece of childhood plastic, now heavier than anything she'd ever held. She turned it over again and again that morning, unable to stop herself from wondering, had Jacob sent it or had the house returned it? Walt came back by midday, carrying a bundle of rope, a portable heater, and a wear expression. "You're pale," he said, setting things down by the door. "Y'all sleep at all?" Emily shook her head. "It spoke to me last night." Walt paused. I don't know what else to call it, but I heard my brother's voice, he said. He remembered. Walt frowned. "That tunnel's more than a tunnel. You know that now, right? It's not just old stone, it's amory." She finished. "It's a memory that doesn't forget." They descended into the basement. The air again, oddly still. The furnace was silent now. Cold, the heat had moved elsewhere. The tunnel was different, wider, no longer cramped and clawing. Ethod opened. Walt stared into it. "It's like it wanted us to come back." They interread each other. The dirt walls gave way to smooth stone. The air was warm, but dry. The strange hum had softened, not gone, but calmer, like a heartbeat returning towards the chamber. Beyond hadn't changed, not in shape, but it had grown new shelves lined. The walls knew names, and beneath one shelf Emily froze her name. Exler beneath it, not a toy, not a ribbon, a page. Torn from her letter, only a single sentence remained, "You are not forgotten." Walt stepped beside her and looked down at the floor. Emily. He pointed. She turned. In the center of their room, someone had placed something gently in the dust, a pair of worn, child-size sneakers. Familiar, one of the laces was tied in a knot the way Jacob always did a Stragan loop. He called it. Emily dropped to her knees. A hand trembling ass reached out to touch them, still warm, as if only recently worn. Then she noticed it, a faint outline in the dust behind them, footprints small, bare, leading deeper, I think. "He's still moving," she whispered. Walt glanced around. "You think he's alive?" Emily shook her head. "Not like we think, but something of him, he's still here. Wherein he's trying to show us something." They followed the prints carefully down a smaller tunnel, just wide enough to crouch through. The path twisted once, twice, then opened into a stone hollow with only one object inside, a wooden door. Old, warped, no frame, no handle. Just a door standing upright in the dirt, carved across the grain. "Barely legible." Below the name "Memory Waits," Walt whispered, "You think this is it?" Emily nodded, but she didn't move to touch it. Eyed. Something beyond the door stirred, not threatening, but guarded, as if the house wanted to make sure. She was ready before it showed her what had never been meant to be seen. The door had no knob, just wood, smooth, pale, slightly glowing with age, as if time had worn it, gently, not harshly, as if even the years had known to tread softly here. Emily stood before it, her fingers hovering inches from its grain. Walt waited behind her Sulant. He didn't ask if she was sure. They both knew this moment had been waiting since 1997. She pressed her palm to the wood warm. It opened not with a creak, but a hush like pages turning in a forgotten book, and beyond it light, not bright, but soft gold, dusted like early morning sun filtered through memory, the kind of flight that knew how to be gentle with grief. Emily stepped through. It was a room familiar, yet impossible. A recreation of Jacob's childhood bedroom, down to the crooked poster of a spaceship on the wall. The cracked globe beside the bed, the drawer that never fully closed. The colors weren't exact, but her memory filled in the blanks. And Thea, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was a boy. Small barefoot, hair, two sleds, same way it always had after sleep. He turned and smiled. "I am." Her knees gave in. She dropped to the floor. Jacob, he looked older and younger all at once. His foe still round with childhood, but his eyes, they held years. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. He tilted his head. "You wrote me a letter." I. Did it help it? Walt doesn't whisper as much now, it listens. She moved closer. "How are you her? Why are you still?" He looked down at the floor. "I stayed when the door opened that night. I thought I was supposed to. I thought it wanted stories. You were accused, so were you." He looked up again. "The house didn't want to hurt us. Them it just wanted to remember. It was built from memory. It was built from memory. It keeps what people forgetters." Blurred her vision. "I didn't forget you." And she looked around. "Is this where you've been all these years?" "Part of me," he said. "Part of me is still where I left it." He reached behind him and lifted something from the floor, her old necklace. The one shed buried in the yard when he disappeared. "A little charm shaped like a book. I kept this," he said softly. "It reminded me of you." She took it slowly, holding it like it might vanish. She got Ken. "You come back?" He paused. The walls around them flickered, not visibly, but in feeling a memory shifting under pressure. He shook his head. "Not the way you hope," but he said, "You can let me go." Emily's breath caught. "I don't want to lose Yahweh again." "You didn't lose me. I'm here. I'll always be here in the stories you kept, in the memory you gave." He touched her hand gently. "Tell them about me, not just how I left, but who I was behind them." The door pulsed once with golden light. The room around them began to fade, not violently but gently, like mist burning off in morning sun. Jacob's smile didn't falter. Time to let the house forget. Emily swallowed hard. "I love you," she whispered. "I know," he said, and then he was gone. The door swung shut behind her. Walt caught her as she stumbled back into Thethnal. The photo of Jacob now in her hand, only this time he was smiling, a smile she'd never seen in the original photo. The photo remained warm. In Emily's hands, as she and Walt sealed the tunnel, no bricks this time, just a wooden frame and plaster enough to hold back the memory. It's enough to close the passage gently, not violently. The house didn't resist. In fact, it felt quieter, as if it had taken a deep breath, and Fennel exhaled. Emily placed the photo of Jacob on the mantel above the furnace. He smiled in it now, not with a haunting grin of a memory trying to escape, but with a soft, open joy of someone who had been remembered properly. That evening, while packing up her father's study, Emily opened a drawer she'd ignored for years. Inside was a letter sealed, unmarked except for her name. She opened it slowly, expecting nothing but the handwriting. Wasson, Mistakel, Michael Halbrook, Emily. If you're reading this, you've found the tunnel. You've heard the wall. I tried to understand it. I thought it was haunted then. I thought it was sacred. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's neither. The else doesn't hold ghosts. It holds grief. It cradles what people were too afraid to carry, but you've done what no one else did. You listened without asking for anything in return. I couldn't save your brother, but you have not by pulling him back, but by letting him go. That's what the house wanted all along. Not a trade. Amory spoken aloud. Thank you, Mach. The next morning, Emily walked through the house one last time. She stood in Jacob's old room, sunlight slanting through the dusty blinds. The wind outside stirred the trees just enough to make them whisper. Against the window, she whispered back, "You're free." Then she turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the morning. A Pelagion year later, the farmhouse was sold to a young couple with a child. They never opened the furnace room, and when their little boy asked who the smiling boy in the old photo was, the one left on the mantel, his mother simply said he was someone who loved stories and someone who was loved very much. The boy smiled, and the house stayed silent, but no empty. Just at peace. Some houses hold echoes. This one held a boy, and now Thathus remembered. The house can finally rest if you believe some stories deserve to be told. Subscribe, because silence should never bury the truth.